So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the exo-armoured elite space marines with power fists and bolters? Let's talk Terminators versus Aggressors, and also throw those chunky assault Centurions into the mix as well. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd focus on the armoured fighting elite of the Astartes. They are a faction that's rather spoilt for choice, with a sheer amount of close-range fighting elites sent into the thick of the action. For this video, I thought it could be interesting to take a look at just 3 datasheets specifically: the Terminators, the Assault Centurions, and the Aggressors. For the Terminators, I'm just going to focus on the standard datasheet. I know they have a bunch of chapter-specific variants, plus their Terminator Assault Squad. Though I feel like for the competition of Power Fist plus close-range shooting, the standard Terminator Squad perhaps represents that best. For this video, let's talk briefly about their datasheets, then go through some raw damage and defense numbers for unaugmented squads, and then a bunch of advantages each of them might have in terms of detachments, characters and transports, and a few other things, then just share some overall thoughts on what tends to get played most in competitive. Jumping straight in with a quick look at the unit profiles, first up we have the standard Terminator squad. These guys being the most storied and well known of the Astartes elites, fighting in their ancient Terminator armour and bearing the Emperor's Crux Terminatus on their left shoulder pad. They incorporate force field technology, and armed with Power Fist and Storm Bolters as their primary weapons, and certainly a massive focus of 10th edition given the new reimagination of their standard miniatures. For their datasheet, they're very nicely durable, 3 wounds at toughness 5 with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, 175 points per 5 of them, or 350 per 10, having gone down in the last points update. They mainly get Storm Bolters for a whole flurry of rapid fire shots at 12 inches, Power Fists in close combat that you could change out for Chain Fists if you wanted to make them a bit better against vehicles. In general, I'm probably a bit more convinced by the Power Fists on the whole, though people like both. And they get a couple of supporting rules, including their Teleport Homer and Fury of the First. Competing against them, we've got the Aggressors, which did kind of feel like they were sort of the Primaris Terminators when they came out. Big chunky Gravis plate, and still fighting with essentially Power Fists and Bolt weapons, though they do have their Flamestorm variants. These guys maybe aren't quite as storied as the Terminators though, and more feel like more sort of a technology-driven solution as opposed to a relic superior armoured plate. These guys have been put up in points a couple of times throughout 10th edition so far, now 120 per 3 of them, so quite pricey per model, more so than Terminators. They don't get the 2+ save or the invulnerable save, but they do get toughness 6, which is handy against a few breakpoints, and then their weapons all get some nice twin links. 3 attacks with twin linked Power Fist keep them relevant against the toughest stuff around, and then both the Bolt Storm and the Flame Storm loadouts get twin linked on the base fist. The Bolt Storm also gets the Frag Storm grenade launcher on top, and they all get their extra boosted AP against the closest target, which is a big deal when shooting. They can put out a lot of anti-horde volume fire. Then finally we've got the Assault Centurions. These guys predated the Primaris launch, and when they dropped, people refer to them as a Space Marine inside a Space Marine. They've got really quite big bulky armour, a toughness 7, 4 wounds and a 2+ save, though no invulnerable save to help against the highest AP stuff. Their main weapon are their siege drills in melee, which are kind of next level against tanks and vehicles. 3 attacks at strength 10, AP 2 and damage 3, and twin linked is pretty massive, also getting sustained hits 2 against monsters, vehicles and fortifications, which is a pretty enormous damage boost there. Otherwise, on the chest mounted weapon I'd take the Centurion Bolters. I don't think getting the grenades keyword is worth passing up on any of them. A squad of them can have 18 shots twin linked within 12 inches, which is rather nice. And then you either get twin flamers or twin melter guns on the fist weapons. I feel like you could genuinely go one way or the other depending on whether you wanted more dedicated anti-horde. We'll see the damage difference in a second. So these guys are 3 contenders. They definitely do feel like they've got a fair amount of overlap in battlefield role, generally punching quite good against armoured targets in close combat, and mostly having some alright anti-horde volume fire with various bolt weapons at close range. I thought we could take a look at their numbers for damage, defense and durability, and a few other pros and cons. First up, let's start with melee damage. This table is recorded in numbers of wounds dealt on average, and it's weighted for 150 points worth of miniatures, so the numbers represent 1 squad of Assault Centurions, but is a bit more than 3 Aggressors or a bit less than 5 Terminators. For this comparison, I've given the Terminators Power Fists, as I do feel like they're probably the most general purpose. They would do better against vehicles and worse against the other targets if you went for Chain Fists, though I feel like Chain Fists are sort of gambling that you're not fighting against monsters and things as well, and they do feel a bit meta and matchup dependent. In any case, for close combat damage against the lighter infantry targets like the Terminiguns or the standard Intercessor, it's generally the Terminators and Aggressors that do better than the Assault Centurions there. I guess that's kind of to be expected, as they just have fewer attacks per point, even if those ones are really nice. On these comparison numbers for efficiency, the Aggressors just win out versus the Terminators, but I feel like the difference is so small it's not that meaningful. Against anything tougher though, anything that's 3 wounds or vehicle profile, the Assault Centurions win pretty big. Against Terminator targets, the damage 2 doesn't do so well, so the Assault Centurions damage 3 wins pretty handily, killing around about 3 Terminators out of a single unit charging, and the numbers are equally superior against things like Rhinos and Land Raiders, particularly against the Rhino, given that the Assault Centurions wound on a 3+ re-rolling, everything else is wounding on a 5+ re-rolling, so they lose that advantage against the Land Raider as they're wounding it on a 5+ with their Strength 10 siege drills. Still though, the damage 3 and that sustained hits 2 easily see them beating the competition, with the Aggressors placing in second place against anything that's fairly tough due to that nice twin links. Overall, at least in terms of base melee damage, I'd probably just about chalk this up to a win for the Assault Centurions. Not enormously behind the others against infantry, but significantly ahead against tough stuff. For unit durability, here's some hits needed to kill 150 points of a unit at 12-inch range. For this one at base I've assumed no cover. If there was cover present, then the 2+ saves would do quite well. That might make the invulnerable save of the Terminators less impactful. I would bear in mind that you're not going to get cover in close combat either way though. In general on the numbers here though, it does seem to be a pretty straight win for the Terminators. Having a 2+ save and a lot of wounds is a big advantage versus the Aggressors in the Assault Centurions versus special weapons and anti-tank style stuff. It's a bit more close with small arms and sort of mid-strength weapons like heavy bolters. The heavy bolters are actually kind of even between the 3 of them, and the bolt rifle is fairly similarly effective against Assault Centurions. But broadly speaking, the 2+ save, lots of wounds and 4+ invulnerable save for the Terminators do have them coming out ahead fairly significantly. If I had included a damage 3 weapon on this, then I suspect that would have been kind of even between the Assault Centurions and the Terminators, just due to it killing Terminators more efficiently and still needing 2 hits to finish off each Assault Centurion. I'd probably chalk the Aggressors up as the least durable overall. Certainly less so than the Terminators, and a bit less than the Assault Centurions, particularly if we had that damage 3 comparison in the table. Finally, for some raw numbers, here's the range damage output. This is assuming that you can deliver the units into 12-inch range. I've maybe been slightly kind to the Aggressors, assuming that they do get their extra AP buff here. Their extra AP -1 against the closest target. Occasionally that might not be the case though, depending on how your opponents deployed things. In any case, the Terminators for this one are fairly comfortably behind with their flurry of Storm Bolter shots, plus a couple of Cyclone Missile Launcher attacks. So really for winning the close-range shooting fight, it's between the Assault Centurions and the Aggressors. Out of the 2 Centurion versions, you can tailor them more to anti-horde, though I feel like probably the Melters and the Centurion Bolters are probably the best overall threat profile. They can still take really quite a big chunk out of hordes, still slaying 9 termagants on average, but do a bit better against all of the more heavily armoured things. Kind of similar sort of efficiency against the Intercessor and Terminator targets, and really quite a lot better against anything that's multi-wound like the Rhinos. Twin Links Melter Guns with good AP and damage do some pretty good work there, and this one assumes that they're out of melter range as well. If you can get them in super close, it's going to get nastier. Overall, I'd probably say that this one, on the raw numbers, is fairly even between the Aggressors and the Assault Centurions, depending on what targets you want to go for. Raw numbers definitely aren't the end of the story though. All the support that you can get in Codex Space Marines is quite a big deal, whether it's characters, transports, or detachment type stuff. I feel like a lot of these extras maybe favour the Aggressors. Certainly character support is a major weakness for the Centurions, given that no characters can join the unit. That means that you can't get any of the easy character buffs like free stratagems from captains or lethal hits from lieutenant type equivalents, and it means that you can't get any useful enhancements inside the unit, maybe things like the Gladius Fire Discipline or Vanguard Infiltrate. For the Terminators, they've got access to their Captain, Chaplain, Librarian and Ancient, which I'd say are all kind of okay and fairly well balanced for what they do. I'd likely rate them as merely okay for the cost rather than desperately stand out. Terminators can definitely be a unit that you can invest some big synergy in, as they're quite so points intensive if you want though. I'd say for character support, the Aggressors have the biggest wins here. The Gravis Captain's a fair bit cheaper than the Terminator Captain, and they can get the Apothecary Biologist, which just adding lethal hits into an Aggressor's unit is pretty standout impressive. It means their Power Fists are far more dangerous against tough stuff they'd be wounding on 5s, and makes their spammed volume fire with all those bolt shots, usually with AP -1, far more efficient against anything they'd wound on a 5 or 6. It's pretty relevant for the fire discipline combo in Gladius as well, which can make their shooting from something that kills hordes to something that takes major damage off anything. Marlius Calgar is certainly one of the strongest Space Marine character datasheets as well. He often gets play with Aggressors in the Vanguard Spearhead alongside an Apothecary Biologist bearing the Infiltrate enhancement, allowing you to put a terrifying Death Star of a unit in the midfield, and his Victrix Honor Guards are pretty good for tanking for the unit, having a 2+ save and an invulnerable save, both of which means that you could potentially take hits on them and then be far more resilient to getting destroyed than the actual Aggressors. Advanced Shoot and Charge is also massively helpful on a close range unit with both shooting and melee too. Next up, for delivery and transport, Terminators do have their advantage in inbuilt deep strike. It does make them particularly fun as a rapid ingress unit. Perhaps a captain or a chaplain wouldn't be the worst addition to that. The chaplain to help them out in melee if they're going to have a good chance of getting there, or captain for reroll charges. If for some reason on the board state it makes more sense to risk a charge out of deep strike, at least that'll give you a coin flip chance. They can use a Land Raider as well. You could have an 175 point unit transported there plus a character. Though in general this one seems to be kind of rarely used for the Terminators, perhaps due to their inbuilt deep strike, and perhaps because compared with the others they skew to a bit more defense rather than damage output, and often transports tend to have more value out of things that are more damage than defense, as you get more value out of protecting their fragile profiles, and they're getting the maximum amount of damage delivered as a sort of alpha strike out of that assault ramp. Otherwise, Assault Centurions are another really popular one to put in a Land Raider to get them into melee. They take up more slots than Terminators, so usually you'd only be able to put 3 of them in a transport. They do fit kind of neatly into a standard Land Raider or a Redeemer though, and I feel like if you are using them then that's probably going to be the best way to get them there unless you're doing anything else fancy and chapter specific. They absolutely do need the delivery given that they only move 4 inches and are best within 12-inch range, plus being a fair bit less durable than the Terminators per point. Finally, for Aggressors, they work pretty amazingly with Land Raiders as well. The Land Raider Redeemer seems to be really popular for them, with 6 of them plus a character jumping out of it, never mind the big threat of the Land Raider itself. That does feel like it's got a very good ratio of threat in the transport compared with the value of the transport, so you could have, say, a 275 point unit, including the Biologist, jumping out of a Land Raider Redeemer. Typically in 40k, transport units often tend to be best when you've got more points of unit within the transport as opposed to the value of the transport itself, but Land Raiders definitely have enough value in their own right. Again, like the Centurions, they're particularly great having a fancy way to deliver them. A lot more close range damage than they have defense, potentially could be really big investment units with enhancements and things going on, and not really all that tough, at least not compared with Terminators. Otherwise, specific detachment things can have all sorts of advantages for various of these. I think Gladius Task Force does work pretty nicely for all of them really. They're slow-moving elite infantry with both range and melee power, and that works out pretty well with the combat doctrines and the access to advanced shoot and charge, plus some pretty nice damage dealer stratagems like Lance Melee or the Storm of Fire. We already mentioned the Fire Discipline combo with the Apothecary Biologist. That makes Aggressors even more standout. Sustained and lethal hits on a 5+ rerolling with Oath of Moment will just brutalise anything, and you even get extra AP with the Storm of Fire. For Firestorm, that places a greater emphasis on shooting. You get to advance and shoot if needed, +1 strength within 12 inches, and they've got access to a nice +1 to wound both at range and in melee. This one does particularly favour Flamestorm Aggressors, with those fairly scary buffs going on, and particularly with a Gravis Captain in the unit for the Devastating Wound Torrent stratagem. That means that Flamestorm Aggressors can have a good shot at melting just about anything they get in range of. It doubles down on helping out transport type units as well, so it really helps Land Raiders. Having a Land Raider Redeemer to deliver them can be pretty scary as well. Though I would say that Assault Centurions are still pretty interesting here as well. They do have some pretty massive firepower at close range, and definitely have damage outputs to rival the Aggressors, at least if they're not buffed. Though I guess the Torrent stratagem wouldn't be quite as good on them, you'd probably be more looking at the +1 to wound one if anything. Finally, Vanguard, I'd say, maybe has more focus on the Aggressors and the Terminators versus the Assault Centurions. Either of those could infiltrate with a character attachment and getting that Warlord trait. As mentioned, Aggressors plus Calgar and Apothecary Biologist is a tried and tested big scary combo there, though you definitely could do the same with Terminators. 350 points of pretty durable might is pretty handy to have in the midfield. I feel like for deploy units that are going for a big threat like that do need to have some good durability, as they're often going to be in a position where the enemy can hit them back hard. They do get some extra defense at range here as well, a nice shooting stratagem and a reactive move against charges, all of which can be quite big. If you're using Centurions here though, it's probably going to be the Devastator type, as they quite like the stratagem to be able to redeploy around the map, maybe in combo with Uriel Ventress. Otherwise, Ironstorm maybe doesn't feel quite as optimal for some of these, though I guess you could use some, maybe jumping out of a Land Raider Redeemer, which can still work fine there. Stormlands isn't maybe quite as competitively played by more mainline Space Marines, but most of these do quite enjoy the advance and charge. You can also advance and shoot for 1 CP, which could certainly be worth it on basically any of these units in a big number. Most of the synergy is for biker units though. And First Company Task Force has a fair few boosts for Terminators, a few nice enhancements including a once per game feel no pain, and some interesting teleport options. Unfortunately overall though, it is seen as rather weak. I think Terminators would have to be an absolute top tier, standout efficient unit to have people have more of a look at it. Finally for chapter things, I'm not going to dwell on this too much here, but there are various detachments or characters that could help out various ones of the units. We mentioned Calgar, I guess Lysander can also be of note for the Terminators. Dark Angels definitely have some Terminator love, they can have precision with Belial if they'd like to. Plus they have their own Terminator datasheet in the Deathwing version, which is just 5 points more, but I think that's worth it for Ignore's modifiers and their Watcher in the Dark. Plus they have their Inner Circle Task Force, which could allow you a few more options there. That can give you +1 to wound things, though unfortunately like the First Company Task Force doesn't seem to be doing very well in game right now. Space Wolves have their own Terminator datasheet and a few characters of their own, Logan Grimnar maybe being my favourite out of them, with the big charge and fight phase rerolls. Blood Angels are certainly more known for their drum troops, though I genuinely think that Terminators aren't terrible with them. A big squad of Terminators charging out of rapid ingress can be a massive force to be reckoned with, a massive amount of strength 10 +1 attack power fists, maybe red rampage to make them hit even harder, and then you've got a unit that's going to be a fair bit harder to remove in return than a fair few of their jump pack squads. They will have stiff competition from the fast movers though, given the fast movers get so much advantage from getting the charge and have maybe got a better chance of doing so. Otherwise, Deathwatch get their own Terminator datasheet with triple heavy weapons in it, though it does cost more. I feel like both Aggressors and Assault Centurions are maybe more interesting for them than some other places, just because both of them are at least somewhat efficient, damage platforms with a bunch of bolter shots, and that can be kind of interesting for a few of their special issue ammo stratagems, which don't really have tons of value elsewhere. They can also teleport units around the board as well, which is interesting, and gives you another delivery option for getting this slow moving elite into range to shoot the enemy. Finally, the Black Templars can use some feel no pain and have some rather nice melee stratagems. They maybe feel like they might be a bit more tempting with the Terminator Assault Squad, given devastating wounds and anti-psyker can combo for them. All three of these do have some stiff competition from them using their sword brethren though. They often tend to get the nod in their place as the fighting elites to charge out of transports or focus big combos around. Overall, between all that, here's my rough takes on them. The Assault Centurions have got strong base damage and a standout threatening to Terminators and vehicles. They don't need as much investment as the others to be quite good, but also can't access several combos or enhancements without characters, and they absolutely need a delivery system given that they're very close range in their damage output, even more so than the others. They're the slowest with a 4-inch move, and they're not really any more durable per point than the Aggressors in my opinion. The Terminators are the most durable, but are also generally the least dangerous overall. I feel like Deep Strike is perhaps one of their biggest selling points, being able to threaten them as an interesting rapid ingress unit potentially, plus maybe being an interesting unit for Vanguard and infiltrating due to their toughness. And for the Aggressors per point I rate them as the least durable. Quite nice balance between range and melee, and a little bit more threat range on the shooting if you take the Bolt Storm and Frag Storm at 18 inches. They outcompete all the rest for anti-horde shooting and still pack a fair punch against vehicles and tough stuff, though not quite as much as the Centurions in combat. I'd say their biggest selling point though is that they're just the easiest to make into big scary damage combos between their character access, transport capacities, and working extra well with certain stratagems. For a bunch of the strongest Space Marine detachments, they just feel like one of the best and most obvious choices, whether it's Vanguard, Firestorm or Gladius. Finally, I thought it would be just interesting to take a look through a few top Space Marine army lists over the past few weeks to see what's actually getting played more than others at the moment. The biggest points change for these guys recently were the Terminators going down a bit. Though kind of as expected, it hasn't really swapped them to be a top tier competitive unit or anything, just a bit more usable than they were. For a look at a whole bunch of Space Marine army lists that have done well, often with Firestorm, Gladius, or Vanguard, it does seem that people do occasionally use both Terminators and Assault Centurions, though they tend to be quite niche and rare picks still. I saw one person who'd use a 10 Terminator squad to some success in Vanguard with Infiltrate, though not much besides that, and a couple of people using 3 Assault Centurions in a Land Raider or a Land Raider Redeemer, as one in Gladius and Firestorm. Certainly out of the three for competitive play, it still seems that Aggressors are very much seen as the go-to. Maybe not too surprising given how easy it is to focus some really good stratagems, characters and enhancements all on one unit to make them just ridiculously dangerous. They usually tend to be in units of 6 to focus all your damage on them, commonly with Marnia's Calgar for people who are playing Ultramarines and often in Vanguard there, often taking Fire Discipline and Gladius, which likely some unit is going to be taking, and could be delivered out of Land Raiders there, and people often use the Flamestone loadout in Firestorm, usually jumping out of a Land Raider Redeemer, generally using the Gravis Captain as opposed to the Apothecary, given the lethal hits doesn't work with those Flamers, and the free Devastating Wound Torrent stratagem is a very nice one. Overall, between all that, I'd rate all of these as absolutely fine and usable in casual play. Terminators in particular are perhaps a particularly easy unit to use, given that they're a bit more forgiving with their durability. Assault Centurions do seem kind of fine, they're kind of specific in really wanting to jump out of a Land Raider in certain detachments, and Aggressors still seem to be the overall strongest, by far the most plays, still being fairly easy to kill per the points investment, but having enough damage and stacking enough synergy on them to really make them next level and worthy of a place in a big transport or some other fancy delivery mechanism. Though I do feel like since the Space Marine Codex dropped, the gap on all of these has closed a fair bit, Aggressors having gone up in points and Terminators having gone down. In any case, I look forward to hearing your guys' takes on these. Which of these armoured elites do you put on the table in 10th edition, if any, and how would you rate the strength of each unit? Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep them all coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.